Hi, I'm Brien Lundin with Gold Newsletter, and I am talking today with Tyrone Docherty with First Tellurium, FTEL, on the Canadian Stock Exchange, correct, Tyrone?
That is correct. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. If you look at the stock chart for First Tellurium, and pardon me, Tyrone, for looking at this short-term quick hit potential that the company offers, because I know there's so much more to the story. But if you look at the stock chart, there's been a couple of times over the last really year, I guess, over the last 15, 16 months or so, where the stock has been trading at triple its current levels or has tripled very quickly in price, simply because tellurium, which is a very underappreciated critical element in today's world, makes the headlines or gets into the news, and people look for a way to play the story. And one of the finest to really play it in the equity markets is with this, still tiny company called First Tellurium. So that's a short-term opportunity, but there's a much bigger long-term story, and that, Tyrone, that's why we have you on today to kind of explain that. You've done this before. You've built companies, sold companies, and you know how to do it. And now you're focused on this company that essentially controls the tellurium story in the investment markets. Tell us a little bit. Well, let's start off with tellurium itself. Tell us about the tellurium market. Then we'll get into what you're doing with the company and your strategic goals.
Yeah, tellurium's a critical metal recognized in both the United States and Canada. It's one of the eighth or ninth rarest metals in the world. Same scarcity level as platinum. And its main uses lately, the last couple of decades, have been in solar panels, specifically cadmium tellurium solar panels, which is a favorite mixture of First Solar. That's their main product line. But also, it's also important in thermoelectrics, and there's new uses that have come on stream that we're just waiting for finalization of market potential for a lithium tellurium battery. So that's what sort of got us the attention from other people. There's no one else in the world doing what we're doing. We kept it quiet for a couple of years, so we didn't want to invite competition because we knew how important the tellurium is. But also, you have to understand, with tellurium, you generally get high-grade gold and silver, and that's what we have as well in both of our properties, certainly high-grade gold up in Canada with high-grade silver. Down in Klondike, Colorado, we have high-grade gold. I'm not sure about the silver content yet, but we're going to be doing some work there this spring, and we'll find out what we have down there. But all in all, we're a junior company that has multi-metal availability to us, near surface, open pittable, everything you'd want in a mining company.
Yeah, and tellurium itself is, as you mentioned, has growing usage, but the primary usage right now is in the cadmium tellurium solar cells by being, I guess, popularized or focused on by First Solar, one of the world's largest and certainly the largest in the U.S. solar companies. We have all of this money, hundreds of billions of dollars, being focused onto solar research, solar development, and it's obviously a growing market. But this is the key element in the biggest company out there producing solar cells right now, and increasing the efficiencies of these relatively low-cost solar cells, but which are completely reliant on tellurium.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to that end, as I build companies, I always like to surround myself with bright people. So on our advisory board, 4 of my 5 advisors used to be working with First Solar. So they know the industry through and through. And the other gentleman's on my advisory board is involved in the battery development with the University of British Columbia, lithium tellurium battery, which we can get into. So I always like to do what a lot of CEOs don't do of junior companies. They like to sort of make all the decisions based on, a flip of the coin or how they're feeling. I like to surround myself with really bright people to tell me what the situation is, good or bad, and then we go from there and make our decisions moving forward. And it just so happens that with the big push from the U.S. government to get domestic supplies of critical metals such as tellurium, it's going to make the need for tellurium certainly much more important than it was 10 years ago. And then you throw in the fact that the U.S. wants to stop imports of critical metals from China. I'm not sure how effective that's going to be, but the point is the market is growing regardless of what China does or not. For example, First Solar is the biggest user as far as solar panel goes. And about 14 months ago, their CEO said in an interview with S&P Global magazine that the first solar alone, starting in 2024, is going to need between 900 to 1,100 metric tons of tellurium just for themselves every year. And that may not mean much to the audience, but you have to understand that the global market right now has averaged about 600 tons a year. So they're going to need 70% addition to what the world market is, and that's just for themselves. Anyone else that wants it, the thermoelectric industry or the battery industry is moving, there's obviously going to be a huge crunch, and people that need it are going to have to come to people that have something to sell to them. So we feel pretty good.
Yeah, and it's not surprising then that First Solar really undertook some efforts to try and locate tellurium supplies to the point of actually toying with the idea of mining it and procuring it itself and having projects, but steered clear of that because of the kind of ESG outrage that what are you? You're supposed to be a clean energy company, and now you're going to get into this dirty business of mining. And then they had to drop all their projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we're so fortunate. As I said, before, we've had private discussions that, when it comes to junior mining, it's better to be lucky than good. If you get both of them on the same plate, then fantastic. But just a brief history, like in 2006, First Solar had a 3-year expedition going around the world looking for potential supplies of tellurium from different mine sites. And they looked at over 100 properties alone in North America. And their number one project by far was the Klondike property in Colorado, which is now part of First Tellurium. And they went into permitting, they're ready to drill it, and then they stopped and they dropped it, which, as I said at the recent conferences, because people say, well, logically, that doesn't make sense if they're looking for this tellurium and this is so great, because the grades are phenomenal, Brien. I mean, it's just a different beast compared to our Canadian property. And they dropped it. So people say, well, why would they drop it? It doesn't make sense. And when you hear the explanation, they understand. As you said, at an annual general meeting in either 2010 or 2011, I've been told that a couple of very large investors got up and said to the board of directors of First Solar, we think you're a bunch of hypocrites. You claim to be a quote unquote, green company, but you're involved in the dirty world of mining. How do you square that circle? So they made an internal board decision, say, to keep their prestige up and their chest puffed out, that they would just buy the tellurium off the market, and it only cost them an extra 1 or 2 pennies per panel, and so that way they can take care of both worlds. So their head of exploration bought the property from First Solar, and he formed the company with his friends and his family, and he approached me, and we ended up doing the deed about 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And because I just paid off my third payment for him, so 2 years ago, and we're very excited about it because the grades are phenomenal. The state of Colorado did a report on it a few years ago, just talking about how the grades were so unbelievable, and we're lucky we have it, and because we have a phenomenal property in Canada, and that we are advancing towards a mining decision. So we're blessed to have 2 very high quality products of a mineral that people need.
Well, we'll get to those 2 projects in a moment. Let's talk a little bit more about the tellurium market. It is dominated by China, isn't it?
Yeah, China supplies about 60% of the market, just like they do with most of the critical metals, right? And that's why they pushed from the U.S. government and the Canadian government recently to get as much of the critical metals on domestic terms as they can.
And again, the forecast supplies are necessary to meet demand are far above the global supplies annual production right now, aren't they?
It's not even close. It's not, just as I said, for First Solar alone, even if you took into the contributions that China keeps giving what they're doing without being have any penalties imposed, it's a 70% increase on the entire world market just for First Solar themselves. And it doesn't talk about any of the other thermoelectric uses or perhaps the batteries by then. And what happens if, in fact, the Biden administration does actually curtail the imports from China, represent 60%, there's going to be a huge bottleneck. So luckily for ourselves, because we're our first tellurium, and I joke we should call ourselves first and only tellurium. We get phone calls and emails from people saying, "Hey, do you have any tellurium for us?" Or also, we have people that have some tellurium in their property saying, "Hey, would you be interested in looking at our property?" So we're sort of the only game in town, so to speak. And so we get the best of both worlds. So, and we're certainly having discussions with the Canadian government on where First Tellurium fits in the overall picture of moving Canada forward.
It reminds me of a lot of other commodities out there, everything from rare earths to base metals and copper. A lot of these metals and minerals and elements that are going to be needed, absolutely necessary for this new economy, new energy transition, and everything going on in the world. So you have these tremendous demand curves coming into these sectors, and markets are just and companies are going crazy trying to find supplies. The interesting thing to me, though, about this is there are a bunch of copper companies out there looking for copper deposits, a bunch of rare earth companies, a bunch of lithium companies out there. But there's only First Tellurium out there that,
right.
At least that's in the public markets that people know about, that's going to be the recipient of whatever investor demand and market attention arises.
Yeah, and this is one of the benefits for First Tellurium is that we're not dependent on tellurium to move forward. We have a high-grade gold and silver property in Canada that just happens to have tellurium with it. And when I say high-grade, Brien, for people, your audience that's watching, we're open pittable near surface, according to our preliminary economic assessment, and it averages over 5 grams of gold per ton. I mean, let that sink in. 5 grams of gold per ton and 157 grams of silver, open pittable on surface. So the tellurium itself will make up about 5 to 10% of our value, but where we get the advantage is the fact that we have something people are going to need. So when we talk about copper, which you did, and we talk about other minerals, well, we're essentially a silver project up in Canada. And silver's needed in solar panels as well, as Mr. Chen Lin is focused on. He talks about silver in the panels, and he does a wonderful chart on tellurium. And then to top it off, to put a cherry on top, is that we just confirmed last September and October, so 5 months ago, that we are actually sitting on a copper porphyry as well on the other side of the mountain. So copper is probably still the most important mineral when it comes to green energy. And a porphyry every junior company looks for, and we just happen to have that as well. And at times it almost becomes unbelievable for people to look and say, how is it possible to have a junior company have all these things going for it? It should be trading at 10 times the amount or whatever the number is. And you just have to get through dispelling that disbelief. When people actually understand, say, well, here's who we deal with. Don't believe anything we say. Here's who's doing this. Here's who said this about our report. Here's the battery from the University of British Columbia that's far superior to a lithium-ion battery, the lithium tellurium. Don't believe us. Go and check for yourselves. And that's how we were successful. Like when I sold my last company, as you mentioned, I took over a company in 1997 called Quinto Mining. It had a market cap of $4 million. And I was very fortunate enough to sell it 11 years later for $175 million. We did it at the Masters Golf Tournament, by the way. My brother was a caddy on the tour. That negotiation, as I tell people, lasted all of 10 minutes, not 10 hours, not 10 days, because they needed my property. It was great for my shareholders, and away we went. The only thing I'd like to add is that we decided to take paper in that company called Consolidated Thompson Iron Mines. So we ended up being about 20 or 21% of their property. And of their company, and they sold 2.5 years later for $4.9 billion. So our enterprise value was $1 billion. And that happens because when you have something that someone needs and they realize you're not desperate to sell, then they have to come to the table with a real check that doesn't bounce. And that's what I see happening with First Tellurium. There's so many things going on. Who is it going to be? But chances are, will it be someone that needs the tellurium for solar panels? Possibly. Will it be someone that needs it for this new phenomenal lithium tellurium battery? Possible. Would it be a copper company that says, hey, you got a porphyry there because we're going to drill it this summer, Brien, and then say, okay, here you go. I don't know. But the point is, when you're in a position where you have multiple potential buyers, it's nice to be like when you sell a house, it's nice to have 10 people wanting to buy your house instead of one, right? And then the beauty of it is, if we don't get an offer that looks anything of interest, which would surprise me, but let's just say it doesn't, then our preliminary economic assessment from 2018 says we can put it into production on a small mines basis, and then be up there mining for 6 months of the year and shipping the ore off. And they said that would be, our capex would be $28 million Canadian. Not
Hmm.
280 million, $28 million Canadian. So, let's say with inflation, let's say it's 35 million Canadian. And then the other benefit to us, Brien, is that our QP, our qualified person, Dr. Lee Grote, professor at University of British Columbia, who also consults to the governments of Japan and India, he just absolutely loves our project. So he believes we're sitting on this copper is fantastic. So we're sitting really, really good. And we just added, for the American viewers, we just added a gentleman named Dr. Paul Spry, who's at the University, Iowa State University. His specialty is economic geology. That's what he teaches. But as Dr. Grote says, Dr. Spry is the foremost person in the world as far as tellurium goes. So we're sitting wonderful. Right. And so that's why, people sometimes say, well, maybe I come across as arrogant. I hope I don't. But at the recent show in Toronto, an elderly couple told my husband, we got to go buy shares in that guy's company because he's not worried about a thing. And I'm not. Because I know we've done it, right? So it's just a phenomenal situation. And Dr. Grote and my chairman, Tony, in October, actually walked our gold, silver tellurium zone and added almost 50%. So we were 2.4 kilometers, and now we're 3.5 kilometers, which is about 2.2 miles. So, and it's still open. And we've only drilled down 200 feet, Brien. So we're sitting pretty good for sure.
Well, let's do that. I know you will remind me, but I want to talk about the battery technology too. I don't want to forget about that.
Yeah.
While we're on the two projects, let's cover those. Now, Deerhorn, you've signed a drilling contract for that, correct?
Yes, and here's the unique thing that's interesting. Not only we signed a drilling contract, but about I think it was Valentine's Day or so, a month or so ago, we bought our own drill. And the rationale for that is that, you can have the greatest property in the world, but if you can't get any drills on there, then you sort of twiddle your thumb. So that's why we did it. But here's the very interesting thing that people have to sort of put on their thinking cap and add, put two and two together, is that we bought it from a group up in Alaska. It was brand new, that they were planning to use it on the Pebble, but they decided not to do it. And through their business contact, who is our driller, they wanted to sell it to us. We got a very good discount on it, number one. But more importantly, Brien, they sold it to us on the insistence that we only gave them shares. They didn't want cash. So, and that was after their business partner had walked our property in September and October, looking for drilling spots for next year. And he was fascinated with our copper porphyry potential. He hadn't even seen our gold, silver, tellurium zone. So again, I could say it's the world's greatest property, and Dr. Grote would say it's good and whatever. But when a fella does business with them in 16 years, he told me he's never told anyone to buy a stock of a junior company. And he obviously convinced them, because they not only sold us the drill at a discount, they wanted to take shares instead of cash. So to me, that kind of puts everything together, what other people think of it.
Yeah. So when is the drilling going to start, and how extensive and all of that good stuff? And tell us a bit about how you realized there might be a copper porphyry.
Yeah, well, that's good. The drilling will start. We have a schedule for August 1st, just because we're up a mountain, and we could get there a little bit sooner, but we don't want to sit there and twiddle our thumbs in case there is a late snowstorm. But we're going to be doing some exploration work before that. Probably in May, we're going to be doing an IP survey, because there's so many minerals on our property. And up till now, it's been covered. No, when I say now, up till recently, it's been covered in snow and ice, a lot of it. So it's starting to recede. And we're seeing outcrops of other minerals. So we're going to go in and do an IP survey, and then follow it up with a soil sampling survey that the Dr. Grote is using 5 of his grad students to go out there and do a complete soil sampling across the whole property, just to find out what we have there. Because I didn't get a chance to tell the audience is that, we were originally discovered as a tungsten property by the Canadian government in 1943, looking for armaments for World War II. And of course, the war ended 2 years later, so there was no need for it. But Dr. Grote, one of the experts in the world when it comes to tungsten, he absolutely loves our tungsten. And I had to sort of say to him, well, Dr. Grote, as good as our tungsten is, no one in the world cares about tungsten when you compare it to precious metal. So we'll get to it eventually, but it is a high-grade tungsten. And if that's all we had, I'd be happy with it, but it pales in comparison to what we have. So we're going to get all this preliminary work done, and we're going to drill starting in August 1st, give or take. And we'll be drilling mainly on the gold, silver, tellurium. just to show the expansion that, we've gone from this and how far it goes, and put a couple deep holes. And then at the end of the program, we're going to probably punch a half a dozen holes into the copper porphyry, just to show the copper boys who now have interest, say, oh, by the way, we do have the copper porphyry, here you go. So that's sort of our thought process on moving forward with that.
Yeah, I mean, if you hit the copper porphyry, that could show some tonnage potential, and obviously another aspect of the story that would be important. And tellurium has always been associated with gold, so that's not surprising either that you have your component as well. Well, tell us a bit about Klondike now in Colorado, your other property.
Yeah, well, as I say, it was bought by the two of the geologists that worked for First Solar on the property. And just to put things in perspective, like, we have the property, the Tyrone property in Canada is considered a high-grade tellurium. We average about 160 grams per ton of tellurium, and our highest grades are between 800 and 900 grams. Certainly very, very rich. The Colorado one, the highest grade there was 33,000. Wow. And there was a couple in the 30,000 grids, but a lot of them between 10 and 15,000, and a lot of it averaging about 1,000. So it's a complete different beast, which you'd kind of expect if First Solar looked at over 100 projects in North America alone and said, hey, this is our number one, and that's what they wanted to push forward. Obviously, it was very special. So we're going to get in there this spring and do some initial work, and then follow up with some drilling. And the gold was high. It hasn't been drilled. They've done a lot of the exploration work and all that. The assays were phenomenal. But apparently, from my understanding, it used to be an old gold prospect from like the 1950s, from either St. Joe's Minerals or someone. And they may have poked a few holes, not necessarily where the tellurium is, because tellurium was worth nothing in the 50s, or virtually nothing. So, the world changes. And I say, we benefit because the fellows that have the geologists that bought it from First Solar, they approached us because we were the only game in town. And it's, again, because people say, oh, here's a tellurium company, I've got something of interest, and we go from there. So we're very well situated. And when we get to the batteries, this is why our stock took off last January 26th of 2022, because up to that, no one really knew about tellurium, and we'd average a trade probably 500,000 shares a month. And then we put out news about this new lithium tellurium battery, and all of a sudden we're trading 3 to 5 million shares a day.
Yeah.
And it went from 18 cents to 70 cents on the very first day, and it sort of backed off between 50 and 65 cents for almost the whole month. And then the stock collapsed. I woke up one morning and said, what the heck is going on? That was the morning that the Russia had invaded Ukraine. So everyone in Europe sold all their stock. And I don't blame them. It wasn't just my company they sold, because we had just gone out of Frankfurt 2 weeks before the announcement came out from the University of British Columbia about this battery. So let me sum it up for the audience and why we're so excited about it. Because lithium-ion batteries are very big, as you know. And the U.S. Department of Energy about a year ago set aside $3 billion for better lithium-ion batteries. So we believe we have a better lithium-ion battery with the tellurium, and here's the advantages. There's 5 advantages. Number one, it's much more powerful, 4 to 10 times more powerful. Number 2, much easier to charge. Number 3, lasts twice as long. Number 4, okay, size-wise, here's the size of a lithium-ion battery, we'll go this way, all right? And now we have size of a lithium tellurium battery, which again is much more advantageous than that. And there's the size between thumb and forefinger. So you imagine what that would do for weights in the cars and all that. And our 5th and final advantage, which we happened to put out a news release yesterday talking about all these battery fires, not only in EVs, but in electric bikes and all that. We just put that out yesterday, is that whereas the lithium tellurium battery is a solid state battery, which means it cannot catch fire. So I say to people, just think about this. Let's say that the lithium tellurium battery had no other advantages over a lithium-ion battery, but didn't catch fire. I think insurance companies and automobile companies would be interested, let alone the fact that it's far superior for a number of other reasons. So, New York City just put in an ordinance 3 days ago, I think on the 20th, talking about the electrical vehicles and certainly bicycles, e-batteries. So it's just a matter of, once the Department of Energy in the U.S., who've set aside $3 billion, they don't know about it yet. I believe they're going to be approached soon. I'm not going to say they're going to throw money at it, but one would have to assume that if you have a battery that won't catch fire, it's kind of important, so that's why we're sitting here pretty darn good.
How far along is that research at this point in time? It's hard
They,
for me to
they believe they'll have a functional on a small scale by the end of this year, the 2023.
Yeah, the energy density of that battery, I mean, the ramifications go so far. When you talk about more power, then you talk about less size.
Yeah.
And so you could dramatically extend the range of electric vehicles, which is the real inhibiting factor right now.
Well, not only that, I'd just like to throw in for your American audience the fact that, I've learned myself, I kind of thought so, that, the Department of Energy has a lot of money. But when I was talking to a gentleman in the military, I said, doesn't the Department of Defense actually have more money than the Department of Energy? He said, yeah, they do. I said, well, the reason I'm bringing that up is that about a year ago, and I almost say about a year ago, I can't remember if it's 9 months, Brian, or 8 months, or 12, 11, the Department of Defense put out, the U.S. Department of Defense, by the way, put out a white paper on what things that they wanted to accomplish they thought was important. And there was four main topics. And one of them, I don't know if it was number 2 or number 3, I should have remembered, was to get better lithium batteries for their tanks or whatever the case is. So I suggest to anyone, if the military, the Department of Defense finds out about it and says, okay, there's a battery that's 1/8 the size and can last twice as long, more powerful. So does that mean they can put in more into into the space that they have for the big batteries? I don't know how they do it, but if they could end up getting 8 to 10 to 20 times more range for the same space, I think there's something they'd be interested. So I'm not going to say we're in contact with the Department of Defense but the point is, if people are looking specifically for better lithium batteries, we know that the University of British Columbia says they've got the better lithium battery and they're going to prove it.
Yeah, and the important point again is this is a kind of area in this R&D where Tellurium every now and then pops its head, out of the foxhole, and people realize that here's that critical element that nobody's really looking at, but is critical to somebody. In the supply-demand dynamic in the market is so out of whack that they absolutely need to find more supplies.
Yeah, well, I mean, a classic example is yourself. You only learned about Tellurium recently, same as Chen Lin. He's been around forever. So if you guys who are much more attuned to these things than the average investor are just finding out about it, the average investor has no clue yet. So that's why we haven't caught fire. But like I say, my previous company, we knew we had something good. It ended up being the iron ore and all that stuff. But, it took a while. And so all it took was one person to say, oh, you got this. Okay, boom. And then once they found out about it in finances, we were sold within 2 years. And then we took the paper and did wonders for. So that's why I've been in this position before. Right. This isn't new to me. I'm the largest shareholder. I don't know if I said that. My wife and I think we between us have about 12% of the company. And if you add our warrants in, it's probably like 15 or 18. I don't sell if you look at insider reports, just because why would I sell at 18 cents Canadian if I think it's going higher? Now, I'm not legally allowed to say what I think it's going to be, but I can tell people I don't think it's worth 17 cents. I think it's higher than that, or 18, Canadian. So that's why I sit there, because I know, the world is our oyster, because, if Tellurium gets stuck for a little while, well, gold and silver is doing well. Because when I mentioned our preliminary economic assessment that we did in 2018, the engineers came back and said it was robust economics, a 1.6 year payback, 42% IRR after tax. And that was based on $1,300 gold and $17 silver. So obviously it's more robust now. So, and if we prove up this copper porphyry, I think that could be the most valuable part of our company. Because people need, as you said, people need copper.
Yeah, the other thing with Deerhorn is not just the base case economics. You're talking about gold prices, and silver prices significantly lower than where they are today. So the economics are so much better. Yeah. But it was also a fairly small footprint, right? For that
absolutely. Yeah, and then we did that on purpose, because if anyone's interested in building a mine, certainly in Western Canada, specifically British Columbia, you have to be on side, most importantly, with the First Nations. And we have a phenomenal relationship with the First Nations. We can get into it another time. But here's the beauty of it, Brian. Like I said, I'm the largest shareholder. I don't put my family money into anything that I think is going to be, you can't de-risk. As I tried to tell my son years ago, he was high school, so of course he knew more than me, but sometimes he listens. And I say, look, you look for the red flags. I said, because if there's a red flag that isn't going to help you, then, if you want to do like some of these other guys and just promote a stock, okay, boom. But if you're actually building a company, because that's where the real money is. When someone walks in with a check that doesn't bounce, you don't have to worry about what's the promotion today. You're building a real company. And so I look at this one. So when it came to me, I said, okay, so again, I'm not a geologist. I don't even play one on YouTube. But, so we have high grade gold, silver, tellurium. Okay, better high grade than low grade. Good, check. Open pitable, check. Much less expensive than having to put in adits and tunnels underground. Wonderful. Okay, environmentally, we're blessed in the sense that this area was destroyed by the Canadian government in the late 50s because they put in the Alcan smelter up there and just destroyed lakes, put man-made lakes in there. So anything we do as a small mining company will be a drop in the bucket. And the metallurgy was done in the 80s by Teck Corporation, before Tellurium was worth anything, and it was a smaller property from them. And so I got the answer to that. So originally, I forgot to answer the question a few minutes ago, is that the copper, how do we find it? Well, very simple. We found it because 2 words, Mother Nature, because of climate warming, because we were under a glacier for years until about, if you look at pictures of British Columbia, where our property was 40 years ago, now it's a different beast. The snow is melting and all that. And that's how we found it by accident. That the guy, when we did some drilling in 2012, the geologist walked to the property, turned around, and there was this copper sticking out of the ground that previously had been under ice. So again, it's better to be lucky than good.
So let's talk briefly about the structure of the company. You have a remarkably low market cap right now. And I believe it's around 15, 16 million Canadian.
Yes.
What's your cash position and the catalysts coming up in the near future?
Well, we have about $1.5 million in cash as we speak, and we got some warrants that can come due at any time, and they're not due until the end of October, and they're at 12 cents. So that could put another $2 million into the kitty. Mm-hmm. And as I say to people, because we're the only tellurium game in town, people are throwing money or asking to throw money at us. And I'm kind of discerning on who I deal with, because a lot of Canadian companies, junior companies, I should say, not just Canadian, but well, in this case, Canadian, they like to take in flow-through shares because, it's the tax advantages. But sometimes you take that and the people just sell their shares after 4 months and knock you back down. So I don't know the purpose of taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. So I try to shy away from flow-through funding unless it's my own, because I know I'm not going to kill the company. So money won't be a problem for drilling this year because we've already bought our own drill, right? And I've prepaid a lot of the work that's going on. And we got, like say, 94 million shares out, and away we go. So we're a pretty small company, and that's sort of what happened with my last company. We were small, and people found out, and boom, and away we went,
So just to summarize everything, the long-term story is pretty exceptional. It's kind of a tech play in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
with some exciting things happening from that standpoint. The demand for tellurium is only going to rise. The supplies are severely constrained, and demand is going to far outstrip supplies. So you've got, I would think, rising prices and rising desperation to find projects going forward. And there's also that short-term speculative component there. What is your downside on something like this? When you look at a share price that's near its long-term lows, and you see that whenever there's interest in the sector, it all seems to funnel into your company, and the price spikes. It's rare to find that combination, in other words, where you have that kind of solid long-term potential, fairly low, you would think, downside risk because you're at long-time lows, and that short-term potential at any point in time of multiplying in price.
Yeah, no, it really is a unique situation. I've been in the markets for 40 years now, or 39 years. I've sold 2 companies. One when I was like 27-year-old pup and did okay, and then I sold this one in 2008. 48 years old, I figured I was retired, and I told my wife, hey, I don't know what I'm going to do, but certainly not going to be mining. It's too darn tough. And here we are 15 years later. But no, it's a great situation. And I don't want this to scare the potential investors. I don't worry about the share price on a day-to-day basis, because I know I'm building something big. And if someone has to sell because they're getting divorced or the tax people are after them, so be it. I just accumulate myself, as you see. And so when we put out a news release, people say, oh, they put out news, we got to sell. And I just sort of scratch my head like, are you serious? We just put out this news and you're going to sell? Okay. And that's why I'm not worried about it. Is that, we're sitting on a winning ticket. I just don't know, is it the big one from Spain where you get like $2 billion worth, or is it the local lottery where you get $100,000? I don't know what it is, but we're sitting on something real darn good with all these minerals that are available to us.
Again, you're near long-term lows. I have a good feeling that something's going to be coming up that will take you off of those lows in the near term. And the long-term picture, again, tellurium is something I think everybody needs to look into. It hasn't gotten the big publicity that a lot of the energy metals have, and lithium, et cetera. But when there is a rush for tellurium, it's not going to be one where there's dozens of companies to pick from. It's going to be you that the market's going to focus on, and all that money is going to flow into. So, Tyrone,
absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm well known as a gold bug. I think you've made me a tellurium bug. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue like anything else. But Tyrone, thank you again for joining me.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.